So you all must have heard about the next generation of GST reforms, which some people are calling GST 2.0. You must have heard all about it. If you haven't, watch our current affairs lecture, the previous current affairs lecture in which we have talked about it in detail. But today in this UPSC Nuggets lecture series, I am going to talk about the body which took the decision for these reforms. Yes, and that body is called GST Council. So basically today's lecture would be focused on what is this GST Council, who are its members, okay, and what decision making powers it has. What is its constitutional status? So all things would be discussed about this major body which takes care of the biggest indirect tax reforms in our country, and that is GST. So today we are going to talk about GST Council. Hello and welcome to Jumbo IS and welcome to this brand new lecture series called UPSC Nuggets. Now I know I haven't been quite regular with this UPSC Nuggets lecture series. I know we have had some delays, okay? But there were some issues because of which I couldn't be that regular. Though my attempt is to come out with this UPSC Nuggets lecture series every day or every alternate day, okay? So that daily, on a daily basis, you get to cover these important concepts that have a high probability of featuring in your exams. Therefore, from today onwards, let me promise you that I'll be fairly regular. I'll try to be fairly regular. You can rely on us for this UPSC Nuggets lecture series. By the way, it's an important lecture series, okay? You'll be spending a few minutes, but every day you'll be learning a new concept, okay? So be regular with this lecture series. At least I will be. You have to do your part. All right. So like I said before, today's topic of discussion is GST Council. Okay, what is GST Council? We'll talk about this. Okay, so let's begin. So what is GST Council? The reason why we are discussing GST Council is because GST Council took a major decision, which is being termed as the next generation GST reforms. Okay. A big restructuring of GST has taken place. That is why people are calling it GST 2.0. Now, GST first came into being in 2017. Okay, it first came into being in 2017, and back then it was being termed as the biggest indirect taxation reform. Okay, this GST 2.0, which is basically restructuring of GST, is the next biggest GST or indirect taxation reform. Basically, the purpose is to simplify our indirect taxation regime, okay? To simplify GST. Number two, ease the burden on consumers and small businesses, and to improve tax revenue for the government. So these are the three aims, okay? Simplification, ease of burden on consumers, and improve tax revenue. To achieve these three reasons, these reforms, which are called next gen GST reforms, have taken place. It's a big deal, very big deal for businesses in India. But the body that took this decision is GST Council. So what is GST Council? Let's talk about this. So GST Council, basically, well, GST came into being in 2017. And to bring in GST, we had to amend the constitution, okay? Through 101st Constitutional Amendment Act 2016, well, this entire system or regime of GST came into being. Now, to manage this regime, we amended the constitution and inserted one more article. The name of this extra article was Article 279A. And Article 279A basically forms GST Council. So Article 279A is dedicated to GST Council. So therefore, if there is a statement in your prelims that GST Council is a constitutional body or a statutory body, you'll say it's a constitutional body because it is made by Article 279A of the Constitution. Make sense? Now, what is the purpose of GST Council? Well, its purpose is it is responsible for everything related to GST. For everything related to GST. Clear? So responsible for setting tax rates, making policy decisions, and making recommendations to center and states. Clear? So everything under the sun as far as GST is concerned is the responsibility of this GST Council. Now, Article 279A clearly says that as soon as GST comes into being, within 6 months of that, or within 6 months of this 101st Constitutional Amendment Act, the President shall constitute GST Council. Okay, so you have to remember this fact that GST Council is constituted by the President. Just remember this because statement-based questions are asked in your prelims. So it was made mandatory that as soon as this act comes into being, this Constitutional Amendment Act, GST Council will be formed by the President within 6 months. It is the duty of President to form GST Council. Okay. Now, before talking about more things about GST Council, let's talk about who are the members of GST Council. Okay. So, well, GST Council in total today has 33 members. Okay, 33 members. Now I'll give you a countdown. Okay. So basically, well, there is Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, Honorable Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, the current Finance Minister. Union Finance Minister shall act as chairman. Okay, chairperson. Now, another Union Minister would be a member. As you all know that every Union Ministry has various departments. To take care of those individual departments, there are ministers of state. So there is a cabinet minister and ministers of state, which are junior to the cabinet minister. Yes, under cabinet minister. So within Union Finance Ministry, there are various ministers of state. So the minister of state responsible for the revenue part of Finance Ministry will also be a member. So Union Minister of State, okay, responsible for revenue. This person shall also be the member. Then every state shall nominate one cabinet minister from their state government into this body. Mostly every state government's finance minister. So state finance ministers generally serve as members. Now, there are 28 states. Right? There are 28 states. So each state will send their own state finance minister. Right? Now, there are 3 UTs in India which have their own legislative assembly. Yes, there is Delhi, there is Puducherry, and now there is J&K. Right? So these 3 union territories with their own chief ministers and cabinet and legislative assembly will send their finance ministers as well. Clear? So Delhi finance minister, Puducherry finance minister, J&K finance minister would also be in this body. Simple? Yes. So now you can see what's the total. Well, 2 from center, okay, 28 from states and 3 from union territories. 33. Yes, all right. So this is the membership of GST Council. Now remember, I told you that GST Council is responsible for every decision taken by or taken with respect to GST. Every decision related to GST is the responsibility of GST Council. Okay. Now, how is the decision making power? Okay. Basically, how decisions are taken. So decision making. For that, you need to understand the vote share. So remember this, every decision taken by GST Council should have 3/4 vote of the council. 3/4, that is around 75%. Without 75% votes on any one particular decision, okay, well, without those 75% votes, that decision won't be taken, won't be passed. So every decision that has to be passed requires 75% of the votes. Now, the central government has 1/3 vote share. That is 33%. And state governments put together, all state governments together have 2/3 vote share. So 133% vote is with center. All states put together have 66% of the vote. Now remember what I told you. For every decision to be taken in GST Council, it requires 75% of the vote. But 33% of the votes are with central government. So can you see? No decision can be passed in the GST Council without center's approval. Because center already has 33%. Without center's approval, the states have just 66%. You understand? In a sense, the central government has a veto on all decisions taken in GST Council. Make sense? Right? Okay. Now, one more thing I need to tell you. Okay. The thing is, when GST was brought, okay, in 2017, well, what did GST do? Well, all indirect taxes, most indirect taxes, there were some central taxes, there were some state taxes. Okay, they all were subsumed under GST. Now, GST is divided into two parts. You all know about this. CGST, whose revenue goes to central government, SGST, whose revenue goes to state government. But all taxes that were earlier under state governments, under central governments were subsumed, almost all, with 3 exceptions. Okay, all taxes, all indirect taxes were subsumed under GST. Now, when the idea of GST was proposed, state governments were not on board. They basically rejected this idea. They said that if you will bring in one GST, well, our taxation powers would be taken away. We are earning a lot of revenue because of our state taxes. But if you subsume our state taxes within GST, then our powers to tax our own population would be taken away. Right? That is why all decisions related to GST are taken by GST Council. And within GST Council, states have membership. There is a reason why in GST Council, states are given membership. Why? Because the central government said that yes, we are taking away your taxes, but all decisions with respect to GST, well, in all decisions with respect to GST, we will take your opinion. Okay? That is why in GST Council, states also have a strong role to play. Though veto is with central government, but states also have a voice. When the government said this, when the government promised this, that look, yes, we are taking your taxes away, but in the overall GST ecosystem, you will have a strong voice. Then states came on board. Though there were other promises also that were made to state government to bring them on board. But this was one reason why GST Council has states also, center also and states also. Both these two entities cooperate with respect to GST. This is an example of cooperative federalism. Remember this word. Okay? In cooperative federalism, center and states cooperate. So GST Council is an example of, remember this statement. GST Council is an example of cooperative federalism. And there is good reason behind it, because you are taking states' taxation powers away or subsuming them. So you have to perform this cooperative federalism to get them on board. Make sense? Remember this part. Now, one more thing about GST Council, okay? And this is an important debate. The thing is, are the decisions taken by GST Council binding on central and state government? Are GST Council recommendations binding on center and state government, or are they non-binding? And why is this question there? Because, and listen to me carefully, Article 265 of the Constitution clearly says that no tax shall be levied on any person in India except with authority of law. Okay? Which means, which roughly translates into that if you want to change taxes or levy some taxes, then you have to pass it as a law. Central level, state level, at both levels. So no tax can be levied except with authority of law. That means you need to take the approval of Parliament or state legislative assemblies. So if GST Council gives a decision and if it's binding, don't you think it will be a violation of Article 265? Yes. So there is this question. There was this question of interpretation of the Constitution. So the matter went to Honorable Supreme Court. And what did the Honorable Supreme Court say? Honorable Supreme Court said that the recommendations of GST Council are non-binding. By making them non-binding, Supreme Court said that we are maintaining the sanctity of Article 265 of the Constitution. Now, you must be a little confused because just a while back I told you that all decisions with respect to GST are taken by GST Council. But if their recommendations are non-binding, then what sort of power does GST Council has? Well, the thing is that legally speaking, Supreme Court made it clear, legally speaking, their recommendations are non-binding. But their recommendations are generally followed. Generally followed because their recommendations are based on consensus. Both center and states agree to a particular decision and then a decision is taken. So obviously their decisions would always be followed. Legally speaking, they are not binding, but they are generally followed. That is why GST Council is powerful. So remember this, the decisions are non-binding, yet they are generally adhered to. All right? That's all you need to know as far as GST Council is concerned. So I hope I gave you all the important points with respect to GST Council and now you remember and you shall never forget. Don't forget, because a question can be asked in both your prelims as well as mains with respect to GST Council and you need to have some clarity with respect to that. All right, that would be all. So I conclude today's lecture with the promise of seeing you again fairly regularly with this lecture series called UPSC Nuggets. So stay tuned. I'll see you next time, surely.